Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over some GLC updates. It's been about 6 months since I last did this, and we have another batch of sets to talk about today. We have Crown Zenith, we have Scarlet and Violet, and also the new cards from Paldea Evolved. So let's get straight into it. First of all, I just want to have a look at some of the online results. There has been 14 GLC tournaments on Play Limitless. They are small-scale events, but still worth looking at and getting some inspiration for deck lists if you are wondering. On the left-hand side, we have the overall win rate of each archetype, and on the right-hand side, we have the winners week to week. And as you can see, there's been a lot of variation in the winners, and you can see when I've got a plus sign for like multiple types, it means they have the same record on that certain week. So yeah, it means we've covered a lot of different types. Looks like Colorless and Psychic are doing really well just from eyeballing it here, but there are a number of archetypes which have had multiple placements in that first place finish. And I'm quite encouraged by the overall win percentage. I'm actually really surprised to see Fairy so high up in its win percentage, despite having so few new cards sort of given to it for a long time, really, which is pretty impressive. The Fire win percentage is really crushing. I really don't think the archetype is like that bad. It has a lot of decent elements to it, but it is quite a high rolly deck, especially when you lean into like Heatmore Gambit play, I suppose. And there is a good amount of Water doing very well, and is always like a popular archetype up in there. So, but it has got at least a win in that week 2 of the Scarlet and Violet GLC webcam format. I think it's only Fairy, Dragon, and Grass that haven't had a win in these 14 weeks. But yeah, other than the Fire win rate, every other deck seems to have like a fairly okay win rate, which is like a good and healthy thing to see for the GLC format, which is always a nice indication. Colorless is looking quite pushed right now and has always been one of the ones that has the most support around it, and actually gains a lot from this block of sets as well. First, I want to talk about the sort of general cards that could be going into all sorts of archetypes. A few decent supporter cards coming in. I actually really think Arven is very strong and does make the cut in a number of archetypes, simply because Item Tutor plus Tool Tutor is such a big combination. When we have so many good damage modification tools, when we have hit point buff tools, and because we have Floatstone and U-Turn Board and other pivot options, it seems really good to me. So I'm a big fan of Arven. I'm putting in a lot of my lists going forward. I think it's going to be excellent. Penny just sort of adds to that, like Acerola, and sometimes for the colorless decks they have Sharon's Care, those sorts of options. I don't think it's going to go into a lot of archetypes, but it does sort of help out that sort of pick up and put down strategy, maybe have some good incoming abilities, that sort of thing. That are worth putting into your deck list just to sort of add to the cause. That's really the same state of affairs for Clavel and Iono. Clavel might be an upgrade to Bridget and Gloria if you feel like adding them to the hand is the upgrade, but there may be a number of archetypes where you have basics with more than 120 hit points, in which case it's a downgrade. So it's just a nice extra option that we have, and we can actually basically play playsets now of this supporter effect if you really want to have that in your deck list. If you are really set up based and have a number of abilities that you want to have throwing around your board all in one go, these supporters now become more and more frequent, which helps you sort of build around that strategy if you really would like to. And there will be a number of archetypes where the Clavel is a straight upgrade to allow you to put these cards into your hand, so then, you know, it's less dead weight in the sort of mid-game if you just want to gain access to one thing straight away, and you can have fodder for, you know, like your trade style effects and whatnot in a number of different archetypes. We have Lipard, we have Cincino, we have Curlier, that sort of thing. So it just seems like a decent upgrade to a few other supporters here that do a very similar thing. And then Iono, it's a fantastic card, of course. We already have N in this format, but having that extra copy gives you an extra turn 1 solid supporter option just to get you through the deck, and it's an extra card that can sit in your discard pile for VS Seeker, so it seems like an excellent card that's going to go into basically every deck now that we can play essentially 2N, which is really cool. Beach Court, we already have Skyrim format, but now if you want to sort of create a theme where you have a lot of 1 retreat cost Pokemon, you can have this stadium as like your bounce to whatever else your opponent's playing, and then you can grant yourself a lot of value just from having 1 retreaters, and just sort of adds to your sort of theme of your archetype, I suppose. Similar thing for Charm of Courage, we already have the Cape of Toughness, but now, I'm looking at things like the Metal archetype, where you have your very chunky single prize basics, obviously single prize. I'm so used to just talking about normal formats. But yeah, now you have Cape and Charm, which really just helps you stay as buff as possible on all of your Pokemon. Some pretty cool special energy. Jet Energy seems like a really awesome card, definitely for things like Colorless, where they have Snorlax that can sometimes nap. But just many archetypes want to have this searchable pivoting energy, especially when Guzhala is such a solid card in GLC. I feel like having this Jet option just to move into certain early game attacking mons or just move things out of the way seems really excellent. So I feel like this could be weaving its way into a number of archetypes as well. And then Luminous, yes, a lot of the time, because we are all playing one of the same type, we're oftentimes going to have the same type attack cost in the majority of situations, but every now and then there can be splash attackers, things like Stunfisks that have fighting energy attack costs as lightning Pokemon, these sorts of things, may find their way into decks if they have big enough upsides in future. So Luminous could sort of make its slots and make more sort of creative cards possible, because we have seen things like Rainbow Energy in the past make their way into different types of decks, and this could also help out things like the Dragon type, for example, just giving themselves an extra special energy to attack with some of their big basic Pokemon, that sort of thing. Seems pretty reasonable to me. And then Defiance Band, another decent damage modifier, staying behind on prizes, but that big buff of 30 damage gives you pretty good payoff. I feel like that's also a decent inclusion. Probably is going to go behind the things like Muscle Band, of course, but still is going to be sometimes in the deck if you feel like you are going to be the archetype sort of going behind more often than not and are more setup based. The big one for me, though, is Reversal Energy. This card is obviously absolutely massive and gives a ton of payoff to some already very powerful cards in the format. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, but certainly on the top line, you can see these sorts of cards that are already in some of the best performing of their own type. Like Werelord is pretty much the face of Frostmoth water-based build. Swampert is a decent draw engine option that now could be, a 1 energy attachment attacking threat with that Hydro Pump as well as draw power. So I feel like this is really, really helping out the water style deck, because you are far less combo reliant now to get a turn 2 Werelord, simply because, again, things like Guzhala can just get you into that reversal early, and then suddenly you're just hitting with special wave straight away. And then even if you then sort of go level on prizes and whatnot, you can then try and find your Blastoise or your Baxcalibur or your Frostmoth or whatever, and get the rest of the energy like attached throughout the game. So yeah, I feel like that's just a really, really good option. It makes Gallade and Guardy both much better Pokemon in the Psychic style archetype. Makes Slacking a far better card as well. Yes, you might have to discard that energy, but leaving that Slack in the active is pretty nice, and we know that oftentimes Slacking is paired with Archeops or with Porygon Z, so we can often just like reload those energies afterwards, which is never too big of an issue. And then the bottom line really is sort of cards that I think are kind of on those fringes that now just get a big boost. I think in general, Dragon just loves seeing an energy card like this, because you don't have to immediately send your double dragon energy into the fray. You now have a reversal energy that can chip in. It can pay for Garchomp's attack straight away, which is pretty nutty. The dragon types already have like double dragon and counter energy. Now they have reversal, and having things like special charge and other things like that for that reload means that they should be able to just maintain their attackers a lot better than they used to be able to. There's a couple of interesting Arcanines. There's the fighting one that requires fighting and fire energy, which is again all encapsulated with one reversal energy, which seems very solid for a pretty chunky stage 1 Pokemon. The fire Arcanine can provide some energy acceleration from the discard pile, whilst also just being a 1 energy attachment attacker, and if you want to have that big burst of damage with the heat tackle, it is an option as well. Ampharos, obviously part of the Flaffy line, which is essentially in every lightning archetype, now could have a means of going Flaffy attached to itself, then turn attached to the reversal, and suddenly have an Electron Crush option for a big burst of 220 damage, which definitely seems solid. Similar thing for the Electivire, very chunky stage 1 Pokemon that can be hitting 180 with just that cost of reversal, which seems very good. Then Copperajah, I feel like Metal is kind of down a different direction. Oftentimes is relying on those basic Pokemon more often than not as their main attackers, but just having that 1/1 of Copperajah with the option to hit 220 at any point is definitely a big threat. So yeah, it also seems like there are going to be lots of different Pokemon sort of coming out of the woodwork simply because reversal energy makes them good. Now, I don't think you necessarily need to gear your deck completely around like random attackers that just benefit from reversal straight away, but I feel like it just makes the better Pokemon, like the ones you're seeing on the screen, just even stronger in these archetypes. And I think there could be a bigger push towards Special Energy Tutor just because of the power of reversal energy, I feel like. Onto the type-specific stuff then. Not a huge amount for grass, to be honest with you. I think the Scatterbug Spooper Vivillon is quite interesting, mostly because these Pokemon can evolve immediately. That's the sort of big upgrade, right? The Scatter and the Spooper are actually the newer cards, and because they both have adaptive evolution, they could help out maybe a Torterra list where you have damage scaling based on the amount of evolutions that you have in play, and the fact that you have so much Grass Tutor from Grottle and Grovyle, you could get these immediately, then evolve up into your Torterra, immediately bench Scatterbug Spooper or whatever, and you have more burst damage than your opponent necessarily expected. Now, we already had Caterpie Metapod, but there weren't really many synergistic Butterfrees. There's the one that can put a bunch of statuses on the opponent for maybe damage potential, but this one offers a different angle, which is Energy Acceleration, which could sort of be a pseudo bit of help alongside Venusaur and alongside Rillaboom, so I feel like that could be pretty interesting. I don't think it's like mandatory or very good, but I think it could be an option just because of these early evolutions can definitely help out an archetype like this. Then Arbolive is an interesting one, again, sort of leaning into the tankiness of your stage 2 grass type stuff. You could have just a full heal option that you have going on in the deck. And plus, this is a pretty big body, right? 150 hit points with 150 damage, vanilla as an attack. Not too bad either, so that could find its way. I think definitely if you are trying something wacky like a Meganium combo with a quick ripening list, that could be pretty cool to see. Onto the fire stuff. A couple of nice big basics, actually. Torkoal has some silly damage output, but you do have to flip some coins to be able to get there. Paldean Tauros might be an upgrade, or at least a side grade to some of the other big basic fire stuff that you have. This is certainly an upgrade to Reshiram at the very least, just immediately out of the gates, because it's basically the same text, but with one less energy discard to its Blaze Dash attack. Then Armarouge, definitely an interesting one, because we are likely to be playing energy acceleration in various forms, be it supporters, be it just having, Charizard doubling up our fire energies, having Magma Basin, that sort of thing. Having the option to move these around and sort of jump between our attackers is really an appealing option, so really makes the deck more versatile and flexible. I'm hoping that at least with Armarouge, this archetype can go above the 20% win rate that we're seeing in the Scarlet Violet format, but who knows. Onto the water stuff then. Kyogre, definitely a big payoff card for these Rain Dance style decks. I feel like that's still the best way to be playing these water archetypes, and having a big 180 damage snipe can be massive at just picking off big stage 2s on your opponent's bench. Baxcalibur might be an upgrade to Blastoise. I'm actually not too sure on it, to be honest with you, because Frigibax is definitely worse than Squirtle, but Baxcalibur is stronger than Blastoise because it has more hit points and it has a slightly better attack. So I feel like Baxcalibur is better. You could even be playing a 1-1 one line of each, to be honest with you. So you just have more consistent ways of getting that line of, or just getting your basic energies flowing as quickly as possible. Just seeing as though you already have your Iridas and whatnot to get into play, you find your candy combo, so if ever you find Squirtle or Frigibax, you're just getting into the game, which is nice. Both of them are supplementary to Frostmoth anyway, but obviously being able to attach to the active is pretty big. And then we have the very chunky Satitan, which could be going alongside your big old Warlord now as that sort of secondary attacker, which also has the same requirements essentially. You are dealing a huge amount of damage still, and you still have 180 hit points, which isn't as impressive as Warlord, but helps you in a prizing situation, or just helps you follow up with another huge attacker after your Warlord eventually goes down, if your opponent is ever having to get through those. And it's another thing that can really take advantage of reversal energy, which is obviously very strong. Onto Lightning. The Lightning theme has still been very much set in stone with those very aggressive basics, and has a decent amount of spread potential with its amazing rare Raikou and stuff. Generator could be interesting in that regard, where it can help you get those faster attacks in with possibly the Miraidon, which is a 90-30. Not quite as impressive as a Regieleki, but doesn't have that painful discard and could sort of go alongside the card as still being a really decent early tempo pressure mon. If you're having Generator in the deck, if you have your Flaffy and your Electric, and even play like the Max Elixir or whatever, if you really want to lean down that direction, you can have really high tempo at your disposal. Raichu's a pretty interesting high damage output stage 1 Pokemon. I don't think it really does necessarily a huge amount for you, but it can be a bigger burst of damage. When Lightning doesn't have the highest damage cap, it's normally just like very fast and gets on the board quickly and tries to be disruptive by picking off Pokemon. But Raichu does give you access to that sort of higher damage output threshold. Similar for Luxray, really. It's a pretty cool card. I think it has anti-synergy, like I just said, because Lightning is so good at getting early prizes with Zapdos and its other basic Pokemon, that Luxray doesn't really have many easy opportunities to come into play via Vibrant Flash, but it can be a great comeback card when you are in a pinch. I feel like Lightning won't play Reversal Energy, but you can still try and just power this up with your Eel and your Flaffy and still have that option as a comeback play, because 180 is a big burst of damage, like I said. If you want to just have this as a 1-1-1 line, we could even look at the Shinx here, where you have that repel effect, which isn't all that great, but it can be, reasonable, especially when we have such high tempo from the likes of our Zapdos. Like I've already mentioned, you can force things into play in the opening stages, and that can be a real headache for the opponent, so it's something to bear in mind for sure. Onto Psychic. The list that's been doing really well in the Scarlet Violet format is really interesting. It's like a Gengar Sableye spread deck, which is really cool. So I don't think necessarily all of these go into that sort of archetype, but there are different ways to play Psychic, of course. There are like more traditional builds that are just playing the Malamar in different evolutions, like the Curlier line, whether you go Gallade or whether you go Guardy. And then you have like your Moshana and other stuff. And I think Mewtwo fits into that one fairly well, where you have that burst of 180 damage on a basic, which is definitely solid. You might be sacrificing the other Mewtwo, but that's not necessarily a huge deal. That one doesn't always make deck lists, so this could be a pretty high damage output basic attacker. And Tinkaton could add to your draw potential whilst also being another high damage output card. Just 2 energy for 180 is very, very efficient. So I think Tinkaton really helps like an evolution based Psychic build. But the Shuppet is actually low-key a kind of big upgrade, because the current best-performing Psychic list that we've at least seen from these online tournaments has been a Sableye-focused build, like I said, that tries to fuel that Lost Zone with Colorless, with VS Seeker, with Palpad, but also with that Burnett line. And this is a better Shuppet, so a nice upgrade for the one person doing extremely well with the Sableye Psychic deck. Really, really cool list, actually. I think it's definitely one I want to try out with more in the Psychic build. The one that I have built right now is more evolution and more sort of traditional, but Sableye is absolutely busted. When you have Sableye, when you have Blacephalon at your disposal, you just have so much like freedom of damage counter placement, and Gengar is a really high tempo threat as well, so really cool build actually that was very impressive to look at. Onto fighting, I think this is one of the better makeovers over the last few sets. The Annihilape is a really good late game damage output beat stick, and even Primeape is just an early pressure option, which I think is very solid. Lucario, another very like cheap, efficient attacking threats that can give you comeback potential. There is the new Paldean Tauros, which I feel like could be a reasonable option if we are still going down that hit and run Hitmon route. Just throwing this into the active with that Fury Horn inbuilt is pretty like reasonable, serviceable if you don't find your early dolls. A rock chestplate could just be a reasonable tool, seeing as though we play a lot of evolutions rather than big basics. This can go on to the likes of Armachamp, the likes of our Annihilape, try and make it stick around for an extra turn while it's just sort of pounding on the opponent, which I think is pretty cool. And then Garganical, I don't think it ever really makes it into the fighting deck list, because we already have Machoke, which can help against spread archetypes, but the Blessed Salt could also do a very similar thing, and maybe just puts you out of range of different attacks as well if your opponent is a sort of lower damage output archetype. I feel like this one's not quite good enough, so I didn't really put it in the limelight, but it's another option, I suppose, because it does have a naturally high hit points, and 130, I think, for 2 fighting is not the worst in the world either, so it still sticks sort of within the theme of being pretty reasonable, like, cheap, efficient attackers, which is the new direction of fighting. I feel like this has got a lot better in recent times. Onto Dark. Dark is actually so powerful with the Pokemon that it has. That's one of like the key selling points. There aren't many things that we gain in Dark, unfortunately. King Gambit was the one that really stood out to me, and that it could give you a reversal energy attacking option alongside possibly just like Hydreigon or something that you could attach this to. But also damage buffs, the likes of Guzzlord, the likes of your Hooper, and even Galarian Moltres, I suppose, that could get into the action earlier on in the game thanks to the leadership ability. So a small one here. Again, it probably doesn't make it into the Darkness deck, but especially because the Poignard and Bisharp aren't anything to really... They're nothing exciting. They're nothing that great. So I feel like the King Gambit probably doesn't make it, but could make Guzzlord more threatening, so it's always on my radar. Onto Metal, this is the other one that I've really enjoyed playing more recently thanks to these new introductions. We now have Revavroom, which is a really great synergistic card that goes alongside Bronzong. It's a high hit points, great draw power stage 1 that the Metal deck just has been really yearning for a long time. So I think the best way to play that Metal deck now is Revavroom, Bronzong, and Magnezone. And then you just try and power up the big basics of Orthworm now that can be a 230 hit point basic with that shoot through. It's an expensive attack, but 100 to the active and 30 to a bench can set up some good numbers. And you just have Zamazenta as well with that huge retaliate option if ever Orthworm is like knocked through, or if the opponent is sort of weaving around the Orthworm as they naturally will because it's such a big boy. You can punish them immediately with big retaliates and get through even, you know, chunky like whales and stuff like that. So yeah, Zamazenta, very, very solid option for metal. Onto Colorless then. There's always a great plethora of cards for Colorless. The Barrel engine is pretty much always in Colorless, and having this Bidoof is certainly an upgrade. It's a cheaper retreat cost and has bench protection inbuilt, so you can just get into your stage 1. And also Squover is obviously a great combo with Bibarrel. Now, seeing as though Bibarrel often goes alongside Cincino, I'm not sure if Squover always makes the deck list, but it could be a card that you could experiment with just for deeper digs. You know, turn by turn, it can give you a lot of reload, which I think is pretty reasonable. Cyclozar is the highest hit point free retreat option that Colorless now has, and just a vanilla 3 for 100 isn't that bad. It could be an early tempo attack if you really need it to be. You know, if you don't really want to spend your Snorlax in the opening stages just hitting through like evolving basics, this could be an easier card that can just sort of simply announce the attack over and over again, rather than Snorlax that has to have other combo cards. Speaking of combo cards, actually, Therapy Energy is a big upgrade, like I was saying, for Jet Energy. That can really help thumping Snorlax, which is one of the most popular colorless beat sticks, essentially. It could also be quite useful with the new Slacking. Now, there are other Slackings. You know, the Lazy Slacking is definitely one that a lot of colorless players will look to, but this Slacking has a huge 180 hit points and an even bigger attack that can do 3 for 240, which is super efficient, and it sends itself to sleep. But again, we have Therapy and we have Jet Energy, so we really don't have to worry about the text of sleep all that often, especially if you are playing the likes of Archeops alongside this card. That's going to be completely fine, and this is silly damage output for even for a stage 2 Pokemon. I mean, it's just monster damage output, which is really awesome, and it can really just keep you ahead as a colorless player. Blissey could be another interesting card. This again can protect your Slacking and Snorlax from sleeping with its Busybody Nurse ability, and also can get into the action. It's a stage 1 with 150 hit points, and it has that Happy Cyclone that also does very reasonable and respectful damage, and can also protect energies by moving them onto your benched Pokemon. So again, I think fits the bill quite nicely here alongside your Porygon or alongside your Archeops, where you're just sort of spreading the threats around and not really giving up any energy as you go, which I think is pretty huge. Then we have Pelipper as well, an interesting stage 1. Just giving you access to supporters as and when you need it. Obviously, when everything's one-offs, Tutor is exceptional, so the Hearsay ability looks really good. It's another way to get VS Seeker, and it's, you know, if you find it early enough in the game, it's going to give you good access to supporters that you're looking for. So yeah, also seems like a worthy 1-1 line, I think, more often than not, especially with the likes of Scoop Up Net. You can certainly get value out of this. We've seen things like Delcatty C play in colorless builds before, and this could also help out in like controlling style builds where it's kind of like a more proactive Delcatty, I suppose, where it can tutor the card you need out of the deck immediately first, and then, you know, can also get you that value towards the late game. So it seems like a decent solid option as well. It's a lot of fun to see it start to pad out now. It looks like pretty much every archetype, again, sorry to Fairy and sorry to Fire, I suppose, somewhat right now in its recent win rate, but it seems like pretty much every color in the game right now has reason to play it, and it has different directions that they can be played in as well. So it's a really interesting time for GLC, and I like to see this game expand and grow and become, you know, more creative as we get more options, not only with Pokemon but also with the supporter and, you know, item cards that we are receiving. The game is getting a good freshen up, I think, with these recent sets, and we're starting to see ebbs and flows of different archetypes, even just from, like, you know, 1 or 2 card inclusions for different types. They spring into relevancy all over again, which is always exciting to see. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.